I never planned to visit her that day. The decision came quietly, without drama, without warning, the way the most life-altering moments usually do. I woke up earlier than usual, the house still wrapped in that heavy silence that settles when two people stop talking, but keep living together. Frank was already gone. He had been leaving early a lot lately. I told myself it was work. I always told myself that. Instead of thinking too much, I focused on something simple, something harmless. I baked an apple pie. Claire loved apple pie. Or at least I thought she did. As the pie cooled on the counter, I felt that familiar urge to be useful, to be kind, to show up without being asked. I didn't call ahead. I wanted it to be a surprise. A small gesture from a mother-in-law who still believed effort mattered. The drive to her house felt ordinary. The sky was pale, the street quiet, nothing dramatic, nothing that hinted my life was about to split in half. Her house appeared just as it always did, neat and welcoming, white fence perfectly aligned, flowers hanging from the porch like they were part of a catalog. It should have comforted me. Instead, something tightened in my chest the moment I pulled into the driveway. There was a car parked near the steps. A silver SUV. I knew that car. I had ridden in it for years. Frank's car. For a second, my mind refused to accept it. I stared, hoping I was mistaken, hoping my eyes were playing a cruel trick. Frank hadn't mentioned coming here. Not once. I sat there longer than I should have, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding, waiting for logic to save me. It didn't. I stepped out of the car slowly. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, each sound unnaturally loud. I told myself there could be an explanation. Maybe he had dropped something off. Maybe I was overthinking. That hope shattered the moment I heard laughter drifting from inside the house. Soft, relaxed laughter. His laughter. The kind I hadn't heard at home in years. My feet moved before my mind caught up. I found myself standing beneath the kitchen window, the one Claire always kept open in the mornings. The voices floated out easily, careless, as if no one in the world could hear them. "You're late," Claire said, her tone playful, familiar. "I had to be careful," Frank replied. "If your husband ever finds out, we're done." My breath stopped. The words didn't make sense at first. They hovered in the air, heavy and unreal. Then Claire laughed softly and said something that felt like a blade sliding slowly between my ribs. "She'll never suspect. She trusts both of us." Both of us. The phrase echoed inside my head, over and over, louder than any scream. My hands went numb. The pie slipped from my fingers and hit the ground with a dull, wet sound. Apples and crusts scattered across the driveway, but I barely noticed. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even move for a moment. I just stood there, listening to the sound of my own heart breaking in a way I didn't know was possible. I don't remember how I got back to my car. I don't remember driving home. Hours later, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, still wearing my coat, staring at the wall where our family photos hung. Me, Frank, our son, Claire. Smiling faces frozen in time, mocking me with everything I thought I knew. At some point, a short, empty laugh escaped my throat. It didn't sound human. It sounded hollow. That night, when Frank came home, he kissed my forehead like he always did. He smelled like her perfume. Gardenia. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. And that was the moment I understood something terrifying. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't afraid. He thought he was safe. As I lay awake beside him, listening to his calm, careless breathing, I made a promise to myself in the dark. I didn't know how or when, but this would not end the way they expected. That morning, something inside me had broken, and something far more dangerous had taken its place. The morning after everything changed, the house felt unfamiliar, like I had woken up inside someone else's life. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was tense, stretched thin, filled with things I couldn't say out loud. Frank left early again, muttering something about meetings. I watched his silver SUV disappear down the street from behind the curtains, my reflection staring back at me through the glass. I barely recognized the woman standing there. Her face looked calm, but her eyes were alert, sharper than they had ever been before. When the door finally shut, I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I made coffee out of habit, not desire. It tasted like nothing. I sat at the same table where we had eaten breakfast together for decades, where I had listened to his stories, believed his excuses, defended him even when something felt off. I thought about all the mornings I had spent building his comfort while quietly shrinking my own world. The anger came slowly, not like an explosion, but like heat rising under the skin. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused to come. Instead, my mind started working in a way it never had before. Calm, methodical, focused. I walked through the house, touching things as if I were seeing them for the first time. The couch, the picture frames, the bedroom where we had slept side by side like strangers. Everything felt like evidence now, proof of a life that had been built on assumptions instead of truth. When I reached his study, I paused. The door was locked, as it always was. Frank had never liked me going in there. Work stuff, he used to say, smiling like I didn't need to understand. That smile came back to me now, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't kindness. It was control. That afternoon, my son called. His name lit up my phone, and for a brief moment my heart twisted. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to protect him, warn him, save him from what I had discovered. But the words wouldn't come. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I let the phone ring until it stopped. The guilt hurt, but not as much as the thought of destroying him before I was sure I could protect him from the fallout. Some truths, I realized, need timing as much as courage. That evening, Frank came home acting exactly the same. He asked about my day. He laughed at the television. He kissed my cheek without looking at me. I watched him closely, studying every movement, every gesture. He avoided my eyes more than usual. He talked too much, filled the air with meaningless details, as if noise could bury guilt. When he went upstairs, I stayed behind, sitting in the dim light of the living room, listening to the sound of his footsteps. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage, and he didn't realize the audience had woken up. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the desk in the spare room with a blank notebook in front of me. I didn't write a letter. I didn't write a confession. I made lists, bank accounts I knew about, documents I had seen before, patterns in his behavior, dates that suddenly made sense. It wasn't revenge that drove me. It was survival. I understood something crucial in those early hours of the morning. If I acted on emotion, I would lose. Frank was good at twisting stories, at making people doubt themselves. If I confronted him now, he would deny everything. And somehow I would end up apologizing. I had seen him do it before, just not to me. Around 3 in the morning, I closed the notebook. My hands were steady. The first outline of a plan sat quietly on those pages. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was real. For the first time since I heard their voices through that window, I felt something other than pain. Purpose. When dawn finally broke, I showered, dressed carefully, and put on makeup. Not for him. For myself. The woman in the mirror looked tired, but there was something new in her expression. Resolve. 2 days later, I walked into a lawyer's office. The building was old, smelled faintly of paper and wood polish. The lawyer, Michael, listened without interrupting as I spoke. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. I told him I wanted a divorce. When he asked if there was someone else, I nodded. He didn't press. Instead, he started explaining assets, accounts, rights. As he spoke, I realized how little I truly knew about our financial life. Frank had made sure of that. When I left the office, fear tried to creep back in. What if he had hidden everything? What if I was already too late? That fear followed me home, but it didn't stay long. That night, after Frank fell asleep, I stood in front of his study door again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I reached behind a photo frame in the hallway and took out a spare key I had kept for years, never thinking I would need it. The lock clicked softly. Inside, the room smelled of expensive cologne and stale secrets. I turned on the lamp and began to search, not knowing exactly what I was looking for, only that I would recognize it when I saw it. And that was when I found the emails. Messages that weren't just about an affair, but about money, transfers, coordination, and one line that made my blood run cold. Make sure the transfer clears before your husband notices. My son. In that moment, everything shifted. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was theft. And I finally understood the full scale of what they had done. Once I saw the emails, there was no going back. The illusion I had been clinging to collapsed completely. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a careless affair hidden in shame. It was calculated, planned. The kind of betrayal that requires time, patience, and a complete absence of conscience. I sat there in Frank's study long after midnight, scrolling through messages, my phone glowing softly in the dark while he slept upstairs, unaware that his world was beginning to fracture beneath him. Each email made something inside me grow colder, steadier. Pain was still there, but it no longer controlled me. Information did. Over the next few days, I became careful in a way I had never been before. I took photos of documents, copied emails, saved statements to a drive I kept hidden deep inside an old sewing box Frank had never touched. During the day, I played my role perfectly. I made dinner. I asked about his meetings. I nodded at the right moments. At night, while he snored softly beside me, I pieced together the truth of what they had been doing behind my back. It was strange how quickly heartbreak can sharpen the mind when survival is at stake. Frank started to notice a change. He watched me more closely, asked questions that pretended to be casual. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening, studying my face across the dinner table. "Everything okay?" I met his eyes and smiled. "Perfect." The word seemed to unsettle him. For the first time in years, he didn't know what I was thinking, and that frightened him. He laughed it off, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened just slightly. He could sense control slipping, even if he didn't yet understand why. 2 nights later, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he stepped outside to take a call. I didn't mean to look. I truly didn't. But the screen lit up, and the preview of the message was impossible to ignore. "Be careful. She's acting strange. Claire." Frank came back in and deleted the message quickly, too quickly. He didn't meet my eyes. That was all the confirmation I needed. They were watching me now, whispering, worried. That knowledge gave me a strange, quiet satisfaction. Fear had finally changed sides. I met with Michael again and handed him everything I had gathered so far. He didn't react dramatically. He simply reviewed the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This isn't just an affair," he said carefully. "This could be financial misconduct." Hearing those words out loud made my stomach tighten, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about humiliation or revenge anymore. This was about stopping them before they hurt my son any further. The day I officially filed for divorce was colder than I expected. Gray sky. Still air. I walked up the courthouse steps with the papers tucked under my arm, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. When the clerk stamped the documents, it felt unreal, like watching someone else's life from a distance. But the moment I stepped back outside, my phone buzzed. "Frank." I didn't answer. By the time I reached home, his SUV was already in the driveway, parked crookedly like he had rushed there without thinking. "So it's true," he said as soon as I got out of the car. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. "You filed?" "Yes," I replied. He laughed once, sharp and humorless. "After all these years, you couldn't even talk to me first?" "After all these years," I said quietly. "You think I still owe you conversation?" That was the moment his mask slipped. Not guilt. Not regret. Irritation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if that would put me back in my place. "You don't know what you're doing. You've lived comfortably because of me. You won't survive this." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. "Watch me," I said. The words didn't shake. They didn't need to. That night he didn't come home. The next day Claire called. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was soft, trembling in that carefully practiced way. "Marilyn, please. Things look worse than they are. We can explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said. You're hurting everyone, she insisted. If your son finds out, he will, I interrupted. And you should be more afraid of that than I am. I ended the call before she could respond. The threats started soon after. Anonymous emails. Subtle warnings. One message said, "If you don't drop this, your son will hear everything." I printed it and added it to my growing file. Every attempt to scare me only confirmed how guilty they were. When Frank and Claire showed up at my door together a few days later, unannounced, I felt something close to amusement. Innocent people don't arrive united when there's nothing to hide. "We just want to talk," Frank said, standing on the porch like he still belonged there. "I'm done talking," I replied. Claire stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "You're misunderstanding everything." "No," I said calmly. "I finally understand it." They left angry, frustrated, exposed. As I watched them walk back down the driveway, I realized something important. The woman who had stood frozen under that kitchen window weeks ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone they didn't recognize, someone who wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. And that scared them more than anything else ever could. The weeks that followed felt unreal, as if time had slowed down just to watch everything unravel. Frank and Claire stopped calling directly, but their presence lingered in smaller, more calculated ways. Anonymous emails appeared in my inbox with no subject lines. Vague warnings disguised as concern. "Think carefully about what you're doing. This will destroy your family." Each message was meant to scare me into silence. Instead, I printed every single one and placed them neatly into a folder. Fear loses its power when it's documented. Michael advised me to stay calm, to say nothing unnecessary, to let the evidence speak when the time came. So that's what I did. I went about my days as normally as possible. I grocery shopped. I took walks. I smiled at neighbors. At night, I organized files and replayed conversations in my head, not with emotion but with analysis. I noticed patterns I had ignored for years. Frank's sudden business trips. Claire's oddly specific financial questions during family dinners. All of it formed a picture that was impossible to unsee. One evening, there was a knock at my door. I knew who it was before I even reached it. When I opened the door, Frank and Claire stood there together again. Frank looked composed, his suit pressed, his expression carefully neutral. Claire looked fragile on purpose, arms folded tightly, eyes already wet. They had rehearsed this. I could tell. "We don't want this to get ugly," Frank said smoothly. "There's no need to involve lawyers any further." I leaned against the doorframe, completely calm. "You should have thought about that before," I replied. Claire stepped forward, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "If this becomes public, your son will be devastated." That was their favorite weapon. My son. I looked at her steadily. "You already devastated him," I said. "He just doesn't know it yet." Frank's patience snapped. "You think you're untouchable?" he hissed. "You've lived off my money for decades. Without me, you're nothing." The words didn't hurt the way he expected. I had already grieved the man I thought he was. What stood in front of me now was a stranger. "You're wrong," I said quietly. "Without you, I finally know who I am." That silenced him. Claire grabbed his arm and pulled him back, whispering something urgent in his ear. They left without another word, but I saw the anger in their retreating steps. Desperation was starting to show. A few days later, Michael called me. "We're ready to move forward," he said. "The hearing has been scheduled." When I hung up the phone, my hands trembled for the first time in weeks. Not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. There's a strange stillness that settles before confrontation, like the air before a storm. I felt it in every room of the house that night. The morning of the hearing, I woke before sunrise. I dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors, nothing dramatic. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to tell the truth. The courthouse was colder than I expected, the fluorescent lights unforgiving. Frank was already there, seated confidently beside his attorney. Claire sat close to him, composed, innocent, her hand resting lightly on his arm. When she saw me, she offered a small, polite smile, the same one she used at family gatherings. I didn't return it. As the proceedings began, my heart beat steadily. Michael spoke first, outlining the divorce, the assets, the timeline. Frank's lawyer nodded along, clearly expecting a standard case. Then Michael's tone shifted. He began introducing evidence. Bank transfers, emails, dates, names. Claire's name. Frank's smile faltered. Claire stiffened beside him. A low murmur moved through the room as the judge leaned forward, listening carefully. When the emails were read aloud, the atmosphere changed completely. Words that had once lived in secrecy now echoed openly, stripped of context, stripped of excuses. Frank tried to interrupt, his voice calm but strained. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "My wife has been under stress." I stood then, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "I have been under stress," I said. "From discovering that my husband and my daughter-in-law were stealing from our family." The judge called for order, but it was too late. The truth had surfaced. Claire turned on Frank, whispering angrily, her composure cracking. "You told me she'd never find out," she hissed. Frank snapped back under his breath, "Be quiet." Every word they exchanged only confirmed what the evidence already showed. Michael didn't need to push further. He simply let them unravel. When the judge adjourned the session, his expression was grave. The decision wasn't announced yet, but I could feel the shift. The power had changed hands. Outside the courtroom, Frank confronted me. His face was pale, his voice low with fury. "You've humiliated me," he said. "Our son will hate you for this." I met his gaze without flinching. "He'll hate the truth," I replied. "And the truth belongs to you." He turned away then, his confidence finally gone. Claire followed him, her face twisted with anger and fear, no longer bothering to hide it. I walked down the courthouse steps slowly, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. I hadn't won yet. Not officially. But something essential had already been decided. I had stopped protecting people who didn't deserve it. And in doing so, I had reclaimed something I didn't even realize I had lost. My voice. After the hearing, life didn't suddenly become easier. In some ways, it became heavier. The waiting was the hardest part. Days stretched longer than they ever had before. Filled with silence, phone calls from lawyers, and the constant hum of anxiety that never fully left my chest. I kept expecting to feel victorious, or at least relieved, but instead I felt suspended, like everything was paused mid-breath. Frank stopped coming home entirely. His side of the closet remained untouched, a hollow space that felt both freeing and unsettling. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't peaceful yet. The news spread faster than I expected. Small towns don't keep secrets, especially not ones involving money and scandal. Neighbors who once waved warmly now watched me with curiosity, some with sympathy, others with judgment. I learned quickly who believed rumors and who respected silence. I stopped explaining myself. I realized I didn't owe anyone clarity except myself and my son. Protecting my energy became a necessity, not a luxury. A week later, my son called again. This time I answered. His voice sounded older somehow, weighed down by information he hadn't asked for. He didn't accuse me. He didn't shout. He just asked one quiet question. "Mom, is it true?" I closed my eyes and told him the truth, carefully, without embellishment, without bitterness. I didn't try to make myself the victim or his father the villain. I just told him what had happened. The silence on the other end of the line felt endless. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I don't know how to process this," he said. "Neither do I," he replied softly. "But we'll get through it." That was the last time we spoke about it directly. Some wounds need time, not discussion. Frank tried a different approach then. The anger disappeared, replaced by something almost gentle. He called late one night, his voice low and familiar, the way it used to sound when he wanted something. "We built a life together," he said. "Do we really want to destroy it like this?" I listened quietly. When he finished, I said, "You destroyed it. I'm just refusing to lie about it." He hung up without another word. That was the moment I knew he had finally run out of strategies. Claire vanished completely. No calls. No messages. I heard fragments of information through other people. She had moved out. She was staying with friends. She was looking for work. None of it mattered to me. She had become a ghost in my life, and ghosts only have power when you keep looking over your shoulder. I stopped doing that. Michael kept me informed as the legal process moved forward. Accounts were frozen. Transactions were traced. Each update felt like another piece of a heavy door slowly closing behind me. There was comfort in the precision of it all. Numbers don't lie the way people do. One afternoon, Michael said something that stayed with me. You know, he said, a lot of people back down before it gets this far. I asked him why. He paused. Because standing in the truth costs more than silence. I understood that now. As weeks passed, I started to notice changes in myself. I slept better. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. The constant tightness in my chest eased slightly. I began to imagine a future that didn't revolve around managing someone else's behavior. I took long walks in the evenings, letting my thoughts wander without pulling them back into the past. For the first time in years, I felt something like independence. Then the judgment came. Quietly. No dramatica non se ment. Just a letter. I sat at the kitchen table and read it slowly, every word sinking in. The court ruled in my favor. Assets were divided. Frank was held accountable. Claire's involvement was officially documented. I expected tears. They didn't come. Instead, I felt a deep, steady calm settle over me. Not happiness. Not celebration. Finality. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat alone in the living room. The house felt different now. Lighter. Safer. The phone rang several times, but I didn't answer. Some conversations didn't deserve immediate access to me anymore. Outside, the street was quiet, ordinary, unchanged. I realized then that the world hadn't ended. It had simply rearranged itself without my permission. And somehow, I was still standing. I went to bed early that night. As I turned off the light, I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of all this. The one who baked a pie and believed kindness was enough to protect her. I didn't judge her. She had done the best she could with the truth she had at the time. But I wasn't her anymore. I had learned something that couldn't be unlearned. Survival isn't about holding on. Sometimes, it's about letting go with both hands and refusing to look back. The weeks after the judgment passed quietly, almost cautiously, as if life itself was unsure how to approach me now. There were no dramatic confrontations, no sudden apologies, no moments that felt like closure in the way movies promise. Instead, there was space. Empty hours. Long mornings where I woke up and realized no one was lying beside me anymore. At first, that absence felt sharp, like cold air in unprotected lungs. But slowly it became something else. Relief. I began sorting through the house room by room. Not in a rush, not with anger, but with intention. I donated clothes, boxed up memories, and threw away objects that no longer had meaning. Frank's things went into plain cardboard boxes, not as punishment, but as a practical end to something that had already been emotionally dismantled. When the garbage truck took the last of it away, I stood at the window and watched without sadness. That chapter had already been read too many times. Friends reached out, some from places I didn't expect. Old acquaintances, neighbors I had barely spoken to, even people who had quietly distanced themselves when the rumors started. A few apologized. Most didn't know what to say. I didn't need explanations. I learned quickly that healing doesn't require an audience. It requires honesty. I chose carefully who I let back into my life, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the woman I was becoming. One afternoon, Elaine called. We hadn't spoken in years, life having pulled us in different directions the way it does. Hearing her voice felt like opening a window in a closed room. She came over that same day, took one look at me, and hugged me without asking questions. We sat at the kitchen table for hours. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt or offer solutions. She just listened. When I finished, she said something I hadn't expected. I've been there. Her marriage had ended years ago, quietly, painfully. You don't come back the same, she said. But you come back stronger. That sentence stayed with me long after she left. I started spending time with Elaine regularly. Through her, I met other women who were rebuilding their lives after loss, betrayal, or simple exhaustion. There was no competition in that space, no bitterness. Just shared understanding. We didn't talk about our pasts much. We talked about what we wanted next. For the first time, someone asked me a question I hadn't considered. What do you want now? I didn't answer right away. The truth surprised me when it finally came. I want peace, I said. Not happiness. Not revenge. Peace. Frank tried reaching out once more, months later. The message was short, carefully neutral. I hope you're doing well. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without replying. Some doors don't need to be slammed. They just need to stay closed. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt finished. As summer turned into fall, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and freeing. I sold the house. The place where everything had broken also held too many echoes of who I used to be. I moved somewhere smaller, closer to the water, where mornings smelled like salt and wind instead of memory. I brought only what I needed. The rest I left behind without regret. In the quiet of that new space, I started writing again. At first, it was just for me. Thoughts, recipes, reflections. Elaine encouraged me to share them online. I hesitated, then agreed. I didn't write about betrayal or courtrooms. I wrote about rebuilding, about the small, ordinary courage it takes to start over. The messages came slowly at first, then more steadily. Women thanking me for saying things they didn't know how to say themselves. I read every message carefully. Each one reminded me that survival, when shared, becomes strength. Occasionally, I heard updates about Frank and Claire through others. Frank's business was gone. His health wasn't great. Claire had left town. None of it brought satisfaction. It just felt like distance, and distance was exactly what I needed. I no longer carried their story with me. I had given it back. One evening, as I walked along the shoreline near my new home, I realized something that made me stop. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being alone. Not of the past. Not even of silence. Silence had become my companion, not my enemy. I stood there watching the waves come and go, steady and indifferent, and understood that this was what freedom looked like. Not noise. Not victory. Just space to breathe. I turned back toward the house as the sun dipped low, feeling lighter than I had in years. The story that began with betrayal hadn't ended in revenge or bitterness. It had ended here, in quiet resolve, in a life rebuilt slowly and honestly. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving anymore. I felt like I was living. A full year passed without me noticing the exact moment it happened. Healing doesn't announce itself. There was no single morning where I woke up and felt fixed. Instead, there were small signs. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped checking my email with dread. I stopped wondering what Frank or Claire might be doing or thinking. Their absence grew so complete that it felt intentional. Like my mind had finally closed a door it once guarded out of habit. Winter came quietly to the coast. The ocean turned steel gray, restless and honest. I liked it that way. I spent my mornings writing by the window, coffee cooling beside me as gulls passed low over the water. The blog had grown beyond anything I expected. Women from places I had never visited wrote to me, sharing pieces of their lives, their losses, their slow recoveries. I never gave advice. I just told the truth as gently as I could. That seemed to be enough. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old house key. The last one I still had from my previous life. I held it in my palm for a long time, turning it over, remembering how much weight it once carried. That key had opened doors to rooms filled with arguments, compromises, and silence. Rooms where I had shrunk myself to keep the peace. I slipped the key into my coat pocket and went for a walk. The tide was low when I reached the shore. The beach stretched wide and empty, the wind sharp against my face. I stood at the water's edge, listening to the waves pull back and return, again and again, as if practicing the art of letting go. I thought about the woman I had been when this story began. The one who baked a pie and believed love alone could protect her. I didn't feel anger toward her. I felt gratitude. She had done the best she could with what she knew. And she had been brave enough to become someone new when the truth demanded it. I threw the key into the water without ceremony. It disappeared instantly, swallowed by the movement of the sea. No hecho. No drama. Just gone. I stood there longer than necessary, breathing in the cold air, feeling lighter with every passing second. That was the moment I knew the past no longer had a claim on me. Frank and Claire had become distant figures by then, reduced to fragments of stories I occasionally heard and quickly forgot. Frank lived alone now, his world smaller than he ever imagined it would be. Claire drifted from place to place, never staying long enough to belong anywhere. I didn't wish them harm, and I didn't wish them well. I wished them irrelevant. And in that wish, I found peace. My son and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. We didn't talk about betrayal anymore. We talked about ordinary things. Work, food, weather. Sometimes, that was all healing needed. He visited once in the spring, standing awkwardly in my small kitchen, looking around as if he were afraid to disturb something fragile. "You seemed lighter," he said. I smiled. "I am." That was all that needed to be said. Life settled into a rhythm I had never known before. Quiet mornings, honest work, evenings that belonged entirely to me. I learned that happiness doesn't always feel like joy. Sometimes it feels like calm, like not having to explain yourself, like sleeping without tension in your chest, like choosing yourself without guilt. One night, as I sat by the window listening to the wind move through the grass, I realized something that surprised me. I no longer needed forgiveness to move forward. Not from them. Not even from myself. The need to understand why had faded. The truth was enough. The ending was enough. If you're listening to this story and you're still standing at the beginning of your own, still staring at something that has shattered your sense of safety, hear this clearly. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure wrapped in apologies that will never come. What you need is distance, time, and the courage to let absence do its quiet work. The story that began with betrayal didn't end with destruction. It ended with space, with clarity, with a woman who learned that being whole doesn't mean being unbroken. It means choosing to live anyway, fully, honestly, without fear. As the sun rose over the water the next morning, spilling gold across the waves, I closed my notebook and stepped outside. The world was wide. The air was clean. And for the first time in my life, nothing behind me mattered more than what lay ahead.